So I think that Jonathan brought up that before we start, that are there any new sources? So I have the old sources. It starts at Kuf Pei Hey. I know some people couldn't find it last week, so I don't want to start until they find it. And we'll go. Well, I don't know if we'll get all the way to Kuf Pei Ches, but because we have one big footnote we have to see. But does everybody see Kuf Pei Hey from last week or 2 weeks ago? It's actually pretty important to see it inside. This is, I mentioned, and I'll say it again, this is one of the places that all of a sudden you see Reb Yaakov as a lamdin on Tanach, which is a very brisker type of thing, and that's why he told it over to Rav Soloveitchik, because most of the time on Tanach, we've had a few places already in Tanach. It wasn't exactly lumdish. It was good ideas, but it wasn't a lumdis. But here you're going to see on Tanach really a lumdis, how Reb Yaakov is putting in. There's a lot of Rambams here. There's Gemaras here. And he's going to turn all this into a halachic shir on the difference between a melech and a shofet. Okay? So let's begin it again. On Kuf Pei Hey, it says, Hagdama begeder melech v'shofet, which I mentioned that Reb Yaakov agreed with me that it should be a Hagdama to say for Shoftim. Hinei aleinu levaer halacha shevi Rambam perak alf halacha zayim hilchas melachim kishemamidim hamelech moshchim oso v'chulei. When you establish a king, you anoint him. Umeacher, actually in the Rambam says me'acher, without the vav. Shemoshchim oso hareze zochalo vonavaat olam. Actually, in the Rambam it says li olam. Okay, and once you actually anoint him, the king can now be merit, or be zocha means in a kinyan type of way, right? He acquires for him and his children forever the kingdom. Okay, so Rabbi Yaakov is going to be medayik from this Rambam. That there's a concept of kishemamidim hamelech, right? You mamid the melech, and then it says umeacha shemoshchem hamelech. So is mashma is something before that. Okay, after you moshech him, then he inherits the kingdom for his children. Vacha mashicha. שיש המודס המלך ואחר כך משיחו, משכוהו, אז הוא זוכה במלכוס לא ובניו. And once you anoint him, then he's zocha. Av b'minui levad. Now notice how Reb Yaakov said a taich in the word mamidim. Minui levad. And the reason why he does this is because the Rambam, if I'm not mistaken, is going to use the word interchanged. Mamidim and minui. Al minui levad, if someone to appoint him alone, lo zacharak la'atzmo, avlo lebanav. Okay, so that's why it's really two different things. Because if la'amid hamelech means to appoint, right, the king, and that's not yet, that doesn't yet give enough strength for the king to inherit the kingdom to his children. Only when he has a Mashiach, and Reb Yaakov will talk about why that is. But tzorach tam, ha hu batzmo masik v'lo malchus bilvad, elakol minuyim sheb'Yisrael Yerusha livno v'lvenveno. Okay, the Rambam says himself that not malchus itself, right, but all the minuyim that are in Israel, rabbanis, whatever it may be, is a Yerusha for him and his children forever. So, and certainly when you are, the other minuyim b'Yisrael, there's no Mashiach there. When you make a Rav in Israel, now his sons inherit it, right? I think I mentioned that Rabbi Riskin came to me after my father passed away and said, you have a schus for the Yerusha, and I'll make you the Rav of your father's shul on the condition that you move to Efrat. But it doesn't apply if you don't move to Efrat. So I said, I'm not moving to Efrat, and I actually don't want the Rabbanah, so now I'm certainly not moving to Efrat. Okay? But the point over here is that Reb Yaakov is asking well, all these other minuyim, whatever you have in Klal Yisrael, right? Minuyim, right? They don't have Mashiach. You don't use the Shemin HaMishcha for them. And yet you inherit it to your children. So why does the Rambam say when you have a Mashiach by Malchus, you inherit? Well, you don't really need a Mashiach for the other minuyim, so why by Malchus do you need it? V'hinei la'el ba'alocha gimel, kosav, ema mida melech betchila el al pi bezdin shel ayin skenim, v'al pi novi ki Yoshua shemina Moshe Rabbeinu bezdina. Now look at the Rambam over here. The Rambam says you don't establish a king at first, meaning initially, only through a bezdin of 70 and through a navi, like Yoshua, like the case of Yoshua, Shemina Moshe Rabbeinu Bezdino, that Moshe Rabbeinu appointed him. Notice how the Rambam said Ema Midim, and then to Yoshua, Shemina Moshe Rabbeinu Bezdino. So Reb Yaakov is assuming that the Rambam means over here is the Mamidim is Lemanot, and then you have the Mashiach. V'ine l'chora behedish and esmana Yoshua Melech, umikol makom lo matzinu shenimshach. You see from over here that the Rambam clearly says you don't establish a king except through 70 elders and Navi, like Yoshua, that Moshe and 70 elders established him. Okay? That's very interesting. It's clear that Yoshua has a din melech, right? And yet Reb Yaakov says, Lo matzinu shenimshach. We don't find that he ever had Mashiach. Okay? And this is the question Reb Yaakov asked to Reb Soloveitchik. He said, where do you find the Mashiach on Yoshua? The Rambam clearly says that Yoshua had a din melech, because it's Hilchas Malachav, Eima Midim Melech, Betchila LLP Bezdin Shel Ayin, Zkain, Valpi Novi, Ki Yoshua, Shimino Moshe. Right? So that's the question he asked. Now, here's where we have to look at note 2, okay? On the bottom, Dover zeh shal Rabbeinu la'grid Soloveitchik mi Boston, b'shnas Tofresh Tzadi Zayin, 1937, kishabikar b'Boston v'nidbaru al harayon liyased sham yeshiva b'yachad. And that's when Reb Yaakov visited Boston. And, don't forget, in those days, it wasn't a small thing to go to Boston. There was you didn't take an airplane, you took trains, to get there. So Reb Yaakov, I have a feeling Reb Yaakov must have somehow, in other words, got a note to him that he wants to see him. And Reb Soloveitchik said, okay. And they spoke about the concept of him making a yeshiva. And Reb Yaakov would be the mashgiach, and Reb Soloveitchik would be the Rosh Hashiva. Okay? Now, why am I saying this? At this point, Reb Yaakov wants to tell Reb Soloveitchik a shtickle Torah, so he'll be impressed with Reb Yaakov. Did Reb Soloveitchik really know who Reb Yaakov was? I guess a little bit he may have known, because Reb Yaakov was the Rav in a little town in Lithuania, and Reb Soloveitchik knew the towns of Lithuania. So he probably knew he was the Tzitavyana Rav, right? Who wants to come. And of course, he knew he was a Slabotker. Now, Reb Yaakov knew about Reb Soloveitchik. Reb Yaakov told me I knew about Reb Soloveitchik when he was 10 years old. We already heard that Reb Chaim has a grandson that's a tremendous, tremendous Ilui, right? Reb Soloveitchik couldn't be more than 10 years old, according to the dates Reb Yaakov gave me. Okay? So when he asked Reb Soloveitchik this question, where's the Mashiach? Okay, Vagrid Heishvlo Sheyesh Mechilta. Sof Parshas B'Shalach, Parshas Amalek, Parsha Beis. Okay, V'Simbas Ne Yoshua. This is on the pasuk, right? It says over there in Moshe Rabbeinu, God says, Ksov Zos Zikar B'Sefer Simbas Ne Yoshua, and write this as Zikar in the Sefer after Yoshua weakens Amalek. God says this, Simras ne Yeshua, Kimocha emche zechar Amalek mitachas hashamayim. Right? So over there it says Simbas ne Yeshua, Magich osa yom nimshach Yoshua. That day, Yoshua got Mashiach. So Soloveitchik said there's a Mechilta. Now a Mechilta is at least as good as a Brisa, right, that says that Yeshua got Mashiach. Okay, so let me tell you the story the way it really happened. Okay, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky and me spoke about this, but somehow or another it got lost in the conversation. Okay, Reb Yaakov was telling me over this piece of Torah, and he said, I asked Reb Yosher this question: how could Yeshua be a melech? The Rambam says, in order to have a melech, you have to have Mashiach. We don't find Mashiach by Yeshua. So Soloveitchik told me it's a sifrei that he did have Mashiach. Now I'm telling you what I heard from Reb Yaakov. And Reb Yaakov said in Yiddish, hat mir obgenart, mir gesagt das a sifrei. He fooled me. He told me it was a sifrei. That's the lush of Reb Yaakov. And I looked at it for the sifrei in Bamidbar. There's a sifrei on Bamidbar Dvar, and I couldn't find it. So I went home. Then Rabbi Yaakov told me the rest of the Dvar Torah, but I went home and started researching it, and I found this Chazal in the Mechilta. Okay, and I'm positive that Rav Soloveitchik, he said Sifrei, but he forgot it was a Mechilta. It's a Medrash Halacha. He remembered it was a Sifrei, but it was a Mechilta. And I went back to tell that to Rabbi Yaakov. Rav Soloveitchik didn't fool you. There was a Mechilta like this. Now, in the Mechilta itself, it does say, the way it says it over here, so there's Magid Osa Yom Nimshach Yoshua Divrei Reb Yoshua. That's the words of Reb Yoshua. There's another person who learns it a little bit differently, but there is Reb Yoshua who learned that the Mashiach, Yoshua had Mashiach. Okay? Now, later on, I found that Rav Soloveitchik wrote letters while he was in Berlin University. Some of those letters he wrote to his uncle, the Brisker Rav, and those letters have been compiled. I saw the letters in my father's house, and I noticed that Rav Soloveitchik quotes this Mechilta. So I knew that Rav Soloveitchik knew this Mechilta. Why? Because the letters he wrote to the Brisker Rav, and he wrote about this topic, he wrote that before he met Reb Yaakov. He was still in Berlin, right? Reb Yaakov he didn't meet till he was a Rav in Boston in 1937, Tov Reish Tzadi Zayin. So he knew, that's why I said to Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky, this is definitely where Rav Soloveitchik meant, but, it was Yotza Mipiv, the Sifrei. Anyway, Rav Soloveitchik in the letter talks about this Mechilta, okay? And that's where Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky quotes, so that's quite important. El Shagrid Atzmo Beigrot Hagrid, okay, Halevi, Amid Reish Samach Zayin, Hikshal Zeh. The Soloveitchik himself in the letter has a problem with this. And he writes like the Vizela Shoni. This is the letter he's quoting for Soloveitchik. I don't remember if it's to his uncle or to somebody else. Okay? It's not clear who these letters were to. People say there was definitely letters there amongst them that was to the Brisker Rav. Why do they want to say that, by the way, parenthetically? To tell you that the Brisker Rav did not ostracize Rav Soloveitchik when he went to Berlin, to the university. Normally, the Brisker will say, like, he didn't talk to him after that he went to university, he was Mekulkal, right? But it's not really true, because he was writing letters in Lumdis to the Brisker Rav, okay, to his uncle. So the point over here is Rav Soloveitchik was in Berlin University, but his head was in the Rambam, okay? So he writes in Igros Hagrid, okay, Hikshals of Vizela Shoni, El Tzarachi in the Mechilta Mashma, Sheyoshua Nismana Lamelech B'Shas Milchemes Amalek. In the Mechilta, it's Mashma that Yoshua was Nismana Lamelech, right, at the time of Amalek. He was already got Mashiach, right? That's what it looks like. Else, why did he get a Mashiach according to this Mechilta? Why did he get Mashiach, right? The Rambam should be no Moshe Rabbeinu Beis Dino. The Rambam says clearly, we just read, like Yoshua, that Moshe Beis Dino was Mimanahim, right? Moshe the Navi Beis Dino, right? So wait a minute. What, the Rambam didn't notice Mechilta? The Mechilta says it was way before Bamidbar, right? But way before Parshas Ubesdin Hainu Shivim Skanim Shanismuch Al Yidei Moshe Kedisa Mishman Sanhedrin, that the Skanim, right, were the 70 elders that Moshe Rabbeinu made. You remember when God told Moshe Rabbeinu to make 70 Skanim, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, I can't handle this crazy nation, right? So he said, get Shivim Skanim. Over Rambam Parakal Mehilchas Sanhedrin, this is the Rambam Halacha Gimel, Mikra, the Esfali Shivim Ish Miziknei Yisrael. The Rambam over there in Hilchas Sanhedrin is talking about, that you have to have 70 elders, and the Rambam quotes the pasuk in Bamidbar to say that Moshe made 70 elders. But it's clear that by the time of Amalek, the war of Amalek, there was still no 70 Skanim who got smicha, because that only happened in Bamidbar. The Rambam koyal minu Yoshua lemelech kodem isoso. Behold, the Rambam goes on the appointment of Yeshua before Moshe's death. Kimavur Parshas Pinchas v'samachtes yodcha olav v'yikaches Yeshua v'yamidehu l'fnei kol ha'edah. The oz nismach kimavur b'kra. In other words, that's when the Shivim Skanim got the smicha, which that's what the Rambam is talking about in Hilchos Sanhedrin, right? That is when it happened, way after, like 40 years after this Mechilta that says Yeshua was Nimshach. So how could you say that? In other words, how could you say that this Mechilta shows that Yeshua had Mashiach? This cannot be the Mashiach we're talking about. That's when he actually became a king as well, because you need Sanhedrin to do that, as the Rambam said, right? And Halacha Gimel, the Kichas Yoshua lo smicha. The pasuk over there in Bamidbar, Chav Zayin Yud Ches to Chav Beis. If you look at the psukim there, it says it says v'samachta yodav alav v'samachta yodecha alav. Moshe should put his hands on the krad the kicha lo koyat basmicha. The smicha lo boy Sanhedrin. V'arei kicha Yoshua haisel lefnei kol oidah. The Sanhedrin kibvur b'Sanhedrin v'chol oidah the krad hakodim. In other words, Rav Soloveitchik is saying over there, he uses the language of Chol Ha'eda, right? He did it in front of the whole Eda. Rashi right away there quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Tez Zayin, that Chol Ha'eda is the Sanhedrin, the Kra Kodim, Zeh Sanhedrin. That's the Gemara, and that's Rashi over there in the Pasuk Cain, Huadin Khan. So you must say that over here also, that Yoshua got he got number one, he got smicha then. Okay, the Soloveitchik is really saying two things happened to Yeshua here. He got smicha, okay, but you don't need 70 Skanim to give smicha. Moshe Rabbeinu gives him smicha, and now you have Moshe Kibbel Torah Messina Masorah Yoshua, right? And then you also got Minui HaMelech, so because you wouldn't need Sanhedrin otherwise. So here's the Minui HaMelech as well. V'zeh Soser's Divrei HaMechilta. The Yeshua Nisman HaMelech Mashas Melchemes HaMolek. He says, that's a contradiction to what the Mechilta says, because according to the Mechilta, he got that before. He got the Mashiach already before. So Soloveitchik says, but the Pashup shot is like the Rambam in Hilchas Malachim says, Eimami the Melech betchila alpi bezdin shel ayin skein valpi navi ki Yoshua shemino Moshe bezdino. Right, so that's where Yoshua became a Moshe the bezdin, which is in the text is used as the word kol ha'eda. Right, that's the way the Gemara says Zeh Sanhedri. Right, so what is the Mechilta saying? It happened 40 years earlier. Right. So that is what Rav Soloveitchik was bothered with. Okay. And then Rav Soloveitchik says, Ula yeshlo milchemes Amalek nimshach rach b'chalois melech l'lchol milchemes Hashem. Rav Soloveitchik wants to make a lomdish chilik here. He says in his letter he's writing to somebody. Maybe you could say, Ula yeshlomar, in the milchemes Amalek he got a Mashiach just for the chalos melech l'lchol milchemes Hashem. In other words, a melech gets appointed in order to fight Amalek, right? We know that. The Gemara says, Gimel, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Gimel mitzvahs nitztavu melech Yisrael, mitzvah Yisrael. The Jews were commanded three things. One, minui melech. Two, milchemes Amalek. Three, right, binyan beis hamikdash. These are three things that the Jewish people, and two of them you need a melech for Bechias Amalek, and that's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, and for building of the Beis Hamikdash, right? So that's why as soon as Shaul became king, right, it says in the text, God said, now you have to be Mocha Amalek, you have to Timches Echer Amalek, right? So Rav Soloveitchik is saying it could be that he had a Chalos Melech to fight, he needed to be a Melech to fight Amalek, because you don't have a din to fight a Melech without a Melech. So since Moshe wanted Yeshua to fight and not Moshe himself, he needed to be Moshe Melech Kedei l'chol milchemes Hashem. In other words, he got a Chalos Melech, a new din of Melech for partially Melech for fighting Amalek. But the full Malchus, he got in Bamidbar. Vil b'shas smicha, sman l'kol dinei HaMelech. B'shas the smicha, he got all the dinei HaMelech. Avol tzorachin, heichem atzinu chiluk kazeh. Okay? But Rav Soloveitchik says, where do you find such a thing that you could be Moshech someone for a partial Malchus in order for him to have a Molech? Once you become a Melech, you fight a Molech. Not your half a Melech, you fight a Molech. Right? So Rav Soloveitchik wants to say this chiluk, but he's not really sure if it makes any sense. Okay? Now, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky comes up with his own answer in the new paragraph. He comes up with this little paragraph, next paragraph, right? And I remember of Yaakov telling me this part, okay, that Reb Yosef says by himself. Somehow I didn't communicate it to him, and he says his own svara. What does it really mean that there was a Mashiach over here? It doesn't really mean literally a Mashiach, that he got a anointing. It means nitgadel. He got to a new level by fighting Amalek. In order to fight Amalek, he needed to get a certain minui as a leader. U'mashichu inyan shel minui legdula, and Mashiach is a minui legdula. Now this is what Reb Yaakov said to me. I'll never forget it. Reb Yaakov said, I showed him the Mechilta. I said, Reb Soloveitchik's right. So he says, that's not what the Mechilta means. The Mechilta doesn't mean that there was Mashiach. He said to me, there was no Shemin HaMishcha then. They didn't make the Mishkan yet, right? They didn't have Shemin HaMishcha, so what did they anoint him with? Now, they could have anointed him with Shemin HaMafarsimim. It's true. But Reb Yaakov said it to me like that. He said, there was no Shemin yet. It doesn't mean literally Mashiach. Now, where did Reb Yaakov get that from? So Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky says where he got it from, because take a look what it says in the Pasuk explicitly in Sefer Malachim. Ukmoshe Rabbeinu mochiach ke b'Malachim Aleph Yud Tes Vav Tes Zayin. But again, l'mashe kosev b'Pasuk, God tells Eliyahu, I'm not interested in you anymore, right? So go mashachtes Chazel lemelech al Aram. You should anoint Chazael, who's a guy, melech al Aram. V'Yisrael ben Yimshi timshach lemelech al Yisrael. V'Elisha ben Shafat me'ovel mechola timshach lenavi tachtecha. Take a look at the word Mashiach 3 times in the pasuk. You never anoint a guy, okay, for king, and you don't anoint a navi. There's no such thing as anointing a navi. So the word Mashiach here means al koch. It means appoint. You're appointing him. Use the word Mashiach ligdula, right? But it doesn't literally mean it. That's what Rabbi Yaakov said to me. Now, Rabbi Yosef Kamenetsky, I don't know if he remembered that I told him that Rabbi Yaakov said this, but this Rabbi Yosef said himself, which is exactly what he was mechaven to Reb Yaakov told me, and Reb Yaakov dismissed the mechilta out of hand. Okay, now at the time when he spoke to Rav Soloveitchik didn't go into all this. Rav Soloveitchik had just said to him that he thinks that there's a sifrei that he did get Mashiach. Okay, now if it's a sifrei, then it would be in Bamidbar, and that would be in the right place. But it was not a sifrei; it was a mechilta, so it was in the wrong place, right? It was way before anything really. Yoshua was even destined to take Moshe's place, right? At this point, it could be Moshe was really supposed to take the Jews into Eretz Yisrael. Who knows what would have been if he wouldn't if we wouldn't have had the whole Ma'aseh Meraglim and everything else. In any event, this is what Rav Soloveitchik wrote in a letter to somebody, and that's the mechilta that he was referring to. I'm positive to Reb Yaakov, and Reb Yaakov didn't accept that mechilta, even though they never really spoke about it. When I showed Reb Yaakov the mechilta, he just passed it off. So Reb Yaakov still has the same question. You don't have a Mashiach for Yoshua. Where's the Mashiach for Yoshua? Gam tzorchi lechora. Amai lo horish Yoshua es hamalchus levanav. Why wasn't Yoshua morish the malchus to his kids? Right? In other words, it says, Kol aminuyim should be Israel. Right? Yerusha levno leven bino. Right? So Reb Yaakov here knows Gemaras. So he says, Hey Nemish, Yoshua lo zocha leben. The Gemara in Eruvin says Yoshua wasn't zochet for a ben. He didn't get a boy. Mikol makam haylo yorshim acherim. He had other yorshim. Imkain harei lahem lioresh hamalchus. They should have been yorish the malchus. His family. Now, if you're going to tell me. It says Yerusha Lebno Ben Beno Ad Olam. The mashma lechora from the Rambam always medayik it very carefully. The rak liyotze chalatzavu morish. It says Ben Beno. Yoshua didn't have any sons. He had daughters from Rachav Hazona, but he didn't have any sons. Mikol makam ha'hevi ba'goyis maimonis. On the Rambam. The Goyish Maimonides says, brings a sifrei. The sifrei says, anybody who is kodem benachla, it doesn't have to be a son. If he's kodem benachla, he gets to have the covenant also of the next in line. So why wasn't Yeshua morish the malchus to his kids? Because he didn't have Mashiach? All the Binuyim don't have Mashiach, right? And yet, you morish it to your child. Of course, the child has to be Roy Ladover, right? Right? If Shmuel wants to be morish his Nevius, his Minui as being a Navi Shalom Melech, the kids have to be Neviim. If they're not Neviim, it's not going to work. Okay, now I want you to skip because Reb Yaakov goes off on a tangent here. Go to the end of this paragraph on Kuf Pei Vav on the right side that I started, and 2 lines before the end about Lufiz et Tzarach Tama Mai Lo Horish Yoshua Tamalchus Liyorsha. Okay, we need a reason for that. Now Reb Yaakov is going to answer all these questions with one yesod. Okay, but he's not finished yet because he continued telling Rav Soloveitchik the following thing. V'hinei. We could prove that not only Yeshua was a king, but he had Dinei Melech. Okay? Of course, every king should have Dinei Melech, but he says you're going to see in the Rambam explicit that he had Dinei Melech. V'hainu, the Rambam Perek Gimel Mimelachim Halacha Ches Kosaf. Now the Rambam Hilchos Melachim Perek Gimel Halacha Ches, where the Rambam discusses the Dinei Melech. Kol Amorid b'Melech. This is the paragraph on the left, top. Kol Amorid b'Melech Yisrael Chayev Misa. Anyone who rebels against the king, Chayev Misa. The Rambam has a discussion there, and then he brings at the end Shenemar Kol Isha Sheyamres Picha. A pasuk in Yoshua. How does he know that someone who rebels against the king is Chayev Misa, is obligated with the death penalty? Every person rebels against you. Harei shaloma din morid b'melech meYoshua. Behold, the Rambam learns morid b'malchus, morid b'melech, that he's chayav misa, right? He learns from Yoshua because that pasuk is in Yoshua. Shevet Chasi Shev Menashe, Bnei Gad Bnei Menashe, right. Say to Yoshua, Kolisha Sheyamras Picha, you must, right? That's where the Rambam. By the way, he's going to show it's a Gemara. That's where the Rambam learns that that you're obligated with the death penalty if you go against the king. Be'emes Makoro mi Sanhedrin daf mem tesam and aleph. The Rambam's Makor is from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. What is the Gemara in Sanhedrin? There's a whole discussion there. Shlomo Melech says to Yoav, right? Why did you kill Amasa? He was an innocent man. Shlomo wants to tell Yoav, I'm going to kill you because you killed Amasa, right? So Yoav says, so Yeshua says, you have to just put in the word over here, Loma Ketalte la Amasa. Why did you kill Amasa, who was going to be the head of the armies of David HaMelech? So Yoav says he was a Morid B'Malchus. Amasa darshan achen rak. Because what does the pasuk say? Amaksiv kolisha sheyamres picha. You must yochel afilu divrei Torah. This is the Gemara there. I would think even if you're learning Torah, you have to stop and do what the king says. Talmud rak chazak v'yamatz. In other words, if I'm in the middle of a shear, I don't have to stop to do what the Melech says because there's a rock. Ach and rak are miyutim, and now it excludes if I'm doing a mitzvah. If I'm mosik a mitzvah, I don't have to do what the king says until after I finish mitzvah. Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky chayav misahu mikra de Yoshua k'moshe kosav Rambam and his Galel. Right, the Rambam had a good source. Right, the source was this Gemara that says. It quotes the pasuk in Sefer Yoshua, Kolisha Shem Yamres Picha, and in fact quotes that pasuk to tell me that Amasa really wasn't obligated with the death penalty because he darshaned ach and rak, and in the pasuk it says rak, and rak is an exclusion. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yaakov is saying. Is from this Rambam you see that Yoshua had dinei malchus because it says a Morid Malchus is chayev bisa from Yoshua, so you had dinei malchus. According to the Rambam, the pasuk that he brings. Now, I want to tell you something parenthetically, okay? I was at a wedding, okay, a family Shurin wedding, and Reb Yaakov came to all the Shurin weddings, okay? And Rev Shnei Kotler was there, Reb Aaron Kotler's son. He was already the Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood. Reb Aaron died a good few years before that, probably 10 or 12 years before that. And at the wedding, I see Reb Yaakov going over to Reb Shnei Kotler, and he says to him, how do you know that a Morid B'Malchus is chayev misa? So Reb Shnei right away quotes the Rambam. He says, the Rambam Hilchos Malachim says, Kolisha Sher Yamres Picha. So Reb Yaakov says to him, smiles, and he says to him, well, you can't learn a new halacha from Tanach. You have to have a pasuk in Chumash. You can't learn from Tanach and New Halacha. It's a Navi can't come and tell you. El Dvar Shein a Navi Yachol Lechadesh, right? The Gemara in Megillah says it. A Navi can't. It's a few Masechtas, but in Megillah, also beginning Megillah, it says the Navi can't come with a new halacha because you can't get Nevuah, to get a new halacha, right? So where did Yoshua? Where did Yoshua get it from? Right? Where did Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven get it from? Right? So Rev Shtei, I was standing there. I was watching them talking. And Rev Shtei said, it's Allah Moshe Misinai. Uba Yoshua v'nismacha al pra. So Rabbi Yaakov says, that's no trick. Anybody can do that. That's what he says. So the truth is, the Rambam never counts it as. But Rabbi Yaakov says, Zelo Kuntz. Das ist nicht kein Kunst, he said. To say, right? You have to find it in Chumash. Now, I'm not going to go into this right now, but another point, we will go into it, okay? Reb Yaakov decided that every halacha you learn from Tanach, you have to find in the Nevi'im, you have to find a remes for it in the Torah, or you can't say it, okay? So there has to be a remes. The question is if you can find it. That's Reb Yaakov's By the way, the Meshech Chochmah says the exact same thing. He shows a few places where in Nach there is a halacha written in Nach, and he shows where it is in the Torah. Okay? Now, Reb Yaakov always used to say, in the Rishonim, I'm mechaven to the Ra'ah, Reb Aaron HaLevi. Okay, I don't know how he knew that, but he said it, right? In Achronim, I'm mechaven to the Or Sameach. He said, the Meshech Chochmah, the Or Sameach, I'm mechaven to him in Achronim. So he always had like a similar way of approaching things like the Or Sameach, and both of them approached this idea. Now, we're not going to talk about it now, but I'm going to show you Reb Yaakov at a different point is going to show the source for Mored B'Malchus in the Torah. Okay? We'll have to decide whether it's how good it is, but he actually shows it, and he was convinced that he's right. And that's what he told Reb Shteir at the wedding, where he found it. He found it actually in Parshas Shoftim V'Shotrim Titein Lecha, and we'll talk about it at a different point. But that's what Reb Yaakov doesn't bring up the question here. He just brings up that it's clear that Yeshua had a din malchus because they learned it from the pasuk. Okay, Gam yesh lo chiach lechora migmar mefureshes b'shilei perik bolo kohen gadol gemar in Yuma damastis and ein shalom el lemelech ulav bezdin. You know, the Gemara, the Mishnah says over there that when you want to ask in the Urim v'Tumim, you have to, it can only be for a melech and a bezdin. The Kohen Gadol is allowed to use the breastplate, that was the Urim v'Tumim, to ask. The Gemara asks, Amrina minohani mili, how do you know that you can ask for a melech in the Urim v'Tumim? Amalei Rababo, Domakra, v'lifnei Elazar HaKohen, Yamod v'shalo. Who zemelech? Okay, so what was the pasuk over there? The pasuk, that's the pasuk by Parshas Pinchas, right? So over there it says, here, let me just get the pasuk. The pasuk says here, Kach l'cha es Yoshua ben Nun ish asher ruach bo v'samachtes yodcha alav. V'madato so l'fnei Elazar HaKohen l'fnei ha'ida v'tziviso so le'neihem v'nasati mehodcha alav l'man yishmu kol das v'shel l'fnei Elazar HaKohen yamod v'shoalo b'mishpat ha'urim, right? L'fnei Hashem al piv yetzuv al pi yavo hu v'chol b'nei Yisrael. Okay? So the Gemara is bothered with, why do you need an extra who over here? According to his mouth, they'll go out and go in. Who v'chol Yisrael? We're talking about Yoshua, so why do you have to say who? So the Gemara says, this is the source, who zemelech. Upirish Rashi, the Yoshua b'shtoikra. The pasuk's talking about Yoshua, right? So who zemelech, you see that the Gemara is saying that who, which is referring to Yoshua, zemelech, right? Harei behedit Yoshua melech, right? And Rashi takes it for a davar pashut. He says, Pirish Rashi, the hub Yoshua b'shtoikra. The pasuk talk about Yoshua was obviously he was a melech. So here you have another Gemara that clearly says Yeshua was a melech. Avalu mazeh. Now here comes Rabbi Yaakov, right? Lu mazeh. Yesh la'akshos. Iname Yeshua melech hayim kei mazeh shehutzrich Shmuel lomar livnei Yisrael parshas hamelech b'Shmuel aleph perik ches halacha yud aleph zeh mishpat hamelech asher yimloch aleichem. Why does if Yeshua is already a king, why does God say to Shmuel, tell the Jewish people the Parsha of Melech? What do you mean? Yeshua was already a Melech. They had that Parsha already. What's this like new Parsha you should tell, Shmuel should tell to Shaul, right? Zeyesh Mishpat HaMelech, right? That they should tell not to Shaul, but to Bnei Yisrael, that they're making a king. They have to know what the halachas of a king are, right? So Reb Yaakov says, right, that from Shmuel, it would appear that they never spoke about this Parshas Melech until Sefer Shmuel. By the way, one does have to ask the question, where did Shmuel get this Parsha from? It's not in the Torah. It's a little bit strange. It's not in the Torah, right? So when Shmuel says to the Jewish people, And he goes through a bunch of halachas that the king can take your children, for bakers, and they can take your girls, they can take your boys for the army, and he could, do a lot of different things, right? Where, parenthetically, I can ask, like, where does that come from? Like, where did he get it from? We're not going to discuss that out, but we will discuss it, right? But the whole parsha, Reb Yaakov is saying, if Yeshua had a din of a melech, the din of a melech, so obviously the Jews had to know this already. So what are you introducing this new parsha? How you do lem b'shpat melech b'mei Yeshua ben Nun? Elevadai da yirak shofet. Vadayin lo hayodin mishpat meluchat shol. He was only a shofet. Okay? Now, how can he only be a shofet if the pasuk calls him, if the Rambam calls him a melech? What does this mean? He's either a melech or he's a shofet. Gam besukkah, daf chav zayin amid beis barashi, shalohem mid shofet. The Gemara over there says, I don't know if you remember that Gemara. It's a very funny Gemara. The Gemara wants to know, I don't remember exactly Gemara, but the Gemara says like this: can you put a blanket on the over the under the schach of the sukkah if the sun is shining very strong, right? And the I don't remember. I think it's an Amora that doesn't want to answer the question. So he starts saying to him, "How many shvatim established shoftim?" The guy asks him a question. You remember the Gemara? The guy asks him a question, right? What are you allowed to do with the blanket at the sun? And he answers him about, he says there wasn't one tribe that didn't establish a shofet. All the tribes established shofet, right? Because he wanted to get out of answering the question, so he wanted to make it. If you check the Gemara there, Daf Chav Zayin Beis, you'll see the whole Gemara. But the Gemara says over there, it goes through all the, it goes through, it says shoftim, and over there Rashi says, shalom mid shofet, kamani shoftim, kachashiv. Rashi over there counts the different shoftim from different tribes. By the way, he doesn't discover all of them from the different tribes, but he has most of them. The kachashiv Yoshua me Ephraim, Eid mi Binyamin, Gidon mi Menashe, Ayin Sham. And he says Yoshua was a shofet, right, from Ephraim. So Rashi clearly counts Yeshua as a shofet from Ephraim. Arei hacha kachoshev Yeshua bein hashoftim. He's not bein hamalachim. He's bein hashoftim, right? Okay, so that's what. Let's just finish up one more paragraph, because the paragraph after that, Reb Yaakov again goes off on a tangent. Ella the ech shenemar b'Yoshua v'ladayin tikshi ha Moshe Rabbeinu b'vadei ha'yemela. Moshe Rabbeinu was certainly a melech. Sharei shaninu b'braysid seder olam v'huva b'zvachim daf kuf beis amid aleph. So in other words, you have to see how Rabbi Yaakov was quoting these Gemaras left and right in front of Rav Soloveitchik. So Rav Soloveitchik knows that Rabbi Yaakov knows Shas. There's no question about it. Okay. Hey smachos. There it talks about Elisheva, the wife of Aaron, right? She had 5 reasons to be happy, right? More than other women. So the Gemara says, Yevama Melech, her Yevama was a king. Who was her Yevama, right? Who was Elisheva, the wife of Aaron? Who was her Yevama? It was Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, if she wouldn't have had kids, right, she would have to fall to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? She'd be a Yevama. So the Gemara calls someone a Yevama when today we call it a brother-in-law, right? We call it a geese or a brother-in-law. In time of the Gemara, they called it a Yevama. She's his Yevama, okay? V'gam amastis in the Reish Perik Yediyas Hatuma, right? That's in Shavuos. Right, this not amos sifin ela b'melech v'navi. The Mishnah over there says in the second parak of Shavuos, right? The yeshivas never learned the first 2 prakim, just the last prakim they learn, because the first 2 have to do with Tumas and Tyrus, and the last have to do with Shavuos, which that's what they're into, right? So they're into the Noshim and Nezikin. So the Nezikin is the Shavuos part, right? That's the last 2 prakim. But the first two prakim discuss Tumas and Tyre. So it talks about over there in the Mishnah, if you want to make Jerusalem, Mosifim ala Ir ala Zora, what do you need? You only could do it with a Melech and a Navi. It goes through, and a Bezdin, right? It goes through the whole thing, what you have to do to make, I'll tell you, Nafkamina Allah, if you want to make Jerusalem bigger, for instance, right? You can't eat Ma'aser Shenu outside Yerushalayim. So let's say you want to make Yerushalayim bigger. You need to go through a whole process to do that, right? Today you'd have to go to the Iriyah, but in those days you have to go to the Sanhedrin and say, I want to make it bigger. You have to get a Navi, you have to get a Melech, you have to get Sanhedrin. I forget, they list off a whole thing. The Gemara there says, Minohani Mili, the Omakra, V'chein Tasu, right? L'dorot. It says in the Pasuk, V'chein Tasu. Where is that Pasuk? That Pasuk is, I'm blanking out on the Pasuk where it is now. I'll check the Gemara in a minute. Upirish Rashi b'mei Moshe dehu melech v'navi. Rashi says, in the time of Moshe, that he was a melech and a navi. Harei muchach l'fi halacha haya Moshe b'din melech. It said, Rashi says he was a melech. V'imkein adai l'chora tikshim parshas melech sh'amalei Shmuel Yisrael mashmer shlo haya yodin ad osa perik mishpat melech. In other words, they didn't know until time of Shmuel the mishpat melech, and you see that Moshe was already a melech, so they really should have known it not only from time of Yeshua but from the time of Moshe. V'chein tasu l'doros. Where is the pasuk? Let me just check. I'm blanking. Does anyone remember where the pasuk is?
Sorry.
What?
No.
I hate looking up a Gemara to find the pasuk. It's like embarrassing. Yeah. The pasuk is in Yud Dalet.
Very yeshiva shavim.
I mean, you could probably Google it and you'll know it. Right? Today, you can Google it and you know it right away. Here.
Is this kasha much stronger from Yeshua? Like, if Yeshua's a melech, well, how come Devarim's talking if in the future you make a melech? It just doesn't fit.
You're right. It's a good point. I don't know if Reb Yaakov will bring that out, but you're right. It's a good point. It says you'll put, you'll Vamarta Simale Aleinu Melech, right? Right. You'll say put a melech, Somta Simalecha Melech, right? What does it say there? From amongst your brothers, right? So you're right. Like if you need a king, right? So the parsha over there says in Devarim, and Yeshua is already a king. You're saying in Bamidbar, he gets the Mashiach of the king, or he gets the appointment of the king in Bamidbar, right? So it seems like that pasuk you'd have to say. I think you'd have to say that's when you get into Eretz Yisrael if you want a king, right? If you want a king, when you get into Eretz Yisrael, you have to ask for a king. But Yoshua and Moshe became kings before Eretz Yisrael, right? So then it didn't have to do with the nation asking. God made the Malachim, he made the king. But even Yoshua, though God made Moshe king, even Yoshua needed to have a Bezdin. That's what the Rambam says, and a Navi. He got the Dinei Malchus already. So clearly, I mean, you're right that Yeshua clearly was a king, right? And that parsha, you're going to have to say, somehow is only Nugayat when you come into Eretz Yisrael. Maybe that's why Reb Yaakov didn't ask it, because before you come to Eretz Yisrael, it was already, right? So when you come to Eretz Yisrael, it's a new period, and there you have to ask for a king. Why is a good question. But that's what.
The parsha seems to be a very strong remez that Yeshua will not be continuing the Malchus. His children won't be continuing the Malchus or something.
Okay, you're right, 100%. That's perfect raya. But the question Reb Yaakov is raising, why not? Okay, it's clear that he won't be, right? And the question is, why not? Why won't he if he's a melech, right? And the same thing was true about Moshe. Moshe did have sons, right? So why is Nikadim? So of course, you can already begin to see where Reb Yaakov is going with this. Okay, that there's two Dinei Malchus, right? There's the Melech that you're talking about in Som Tosim Alecha Melech, in Parsha Shoftim Dvarim, and there's another type of Melech also. And that Melech, Rabbi Yaakov is going to say, is called a Shofet. Okay? But he has Dinei Malchus, and this is what he told to Rav Soloveitchik. There's two Dinim in Melech. There's a Melech that's the Melech that we always know, and there's a Melech that's really a Shofet, but has Dinei Malchus. Okay? So you know what? We'll have to take that up. By the way, I'm not going to be around for the next 2 Mondays, so we'll have to take it up in 2 weeks. But here's where we're at. We're at the question of, and I mean, I think Jonathan made it stronger. The question now, where is the pasuk? Where's the pasuk that it says?
Pasuk is Shmos Chafhei Tes.
Exactly. That's in where is that? Is that in that's in Parshas Truma?
I don't know. The Gemara doesn't tell me Parsha.
Okay, but I think it's in Parshas Truma. I think Parshas Truma.
The word Ledoros is in Rashi, not in the Gemara, but it's not in the pasuk.
V'chein ta'aseh, Ledoros doesn't say. It says V'chein ta'aseh, right? That's what it should say in the pasuk. And the Gemara drashes V'chein ta'aseh Ledoros, because the next year V'chein ta'aseh. So it should keep going on. That's where we learn that when you want, just like when you build a Mishkan, right? Same thing as when you want to add to the Mishkan, you're going to have to go through the process of a king and a Navi and a Sanhedrin. And Rashi over there says, "V'chein ta'aseh kroy yisera." Rashi lemidrash ledoros. Ubimei Moshe dehu melech v'navi. That's what Reb Yaakov was quoting. In the time of Moshe, that he was a melech and navi, right? V'achiv kohen gadol v'urim v'tumim v'shivim skeinim. Right? He says this is what you need, and this is all what you had. By the way, I mean, I'm just going to add this, but we're not going to discuss it. Rashi says over here, Shivim Skeinim, in the time of Moshe. Okay? In when they're building the Mishkan, there's already Shivim Skeinim. So Rav Soloveitchik's question is that they didn't have Shivim Skeinim until Bamidbar. Not so Pashut. Rashi says there was Shivim Skeinim here too, but at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, it says Shivim Skeinim already, which could mean that Yoshua did have Shivim Skeinim in his time in Parshas B'Shalach already, right? Because in Parshas Mishpatim, you already find Shivim Skeinim at the end of Parshas Mishpatim. But okay, we won't go into that right now. But does everybody hear the question? You get the question. Where Reb Yaakov is looking for is a new status that didn't exist, that nobody sort of knew about. Is he a king? Is he a shofet? If he's a shofet, why does he have Dinei Malchus? Why does he get Kolisha Shar Yamras Picha Yubas? Right? That's for a melech. The Rambam learns that for a melech, and the Rambam calls him a melech. So in what sense is he a melech? And what sense he's like Rashi? He's a shofet, right? That's what Reb Yaakov asked Rav Soloveitchik. Okay, and I don't know if they ever got to the answer, but Reb Yaakov is going to answer this question using the Tanach, learning the new halacha from psukim in the Tanach. That not a new halacha, but that this halacha existed, as you see from the Tanach. This new type of malchus called shofet existed in the Tanakh, and that's on page Kuf Pei Zayin at the end. That's where we'll start when we meet in 2 weeks from now. If you want to go over, you can go over Kuf Pei Zayin on the last line, and it's going to go into Kuf Pei Ches as well, and Kuf Pei Tes as well. Okay, that we'll already see next week. Yeah, question.
Rabbi Shurin, you mean two Mondays in a row we're not meeting?
We're not meeting.
Okay.
I'll be in America.
Okay.
I would even meet while I'm in America, but I never know what I'm going to be doing on that Monday. I could be flying somewhere. Who knows?
Right. Makes sense.
Okay, guys?
Okay.
We'll take it up in 2 weeks.
Okay, B'ezrat Hashem. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.